Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grandstand Sports Data, your go to channel for sports, statistics, and unbiased handicapping. In today's video, we'll be presenting to you the best way to find your NFL franchise quarterback. We will be researching on how to acquire this quarterback and then the quarterback traits that are common in successful quarterbacks when we look back into history. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, what do we at Grandstand Sports Data qualify as a franchise quarterback? What we came up with is that we believe that a divisional round finish would qualify you as a franchise quarterback. That means you would have finished in the top 8 in terms of your team's performance. You would have either got eliminated in this round, or you even would have went further than this round. You need to think about teams who made it to the wild card, and that means that quarterback actually got a playoff win to get into the divisional round, or he played well enough during the regular season, this quarterback, in order to get that first round bye and have him start his playoff performance in the divisional round. Would also like to cover that in this illustration, we will not just be analyzing the top 8, we will be analyzing the top 4. So conference finalists, we'll be analyzing the top 2, which would be the Super Bowl quarterbacks, and then Super Bowl winners as well. And we're dating this back all the way to the year 2000. So there's going to be some years that are not included, but we're going back to the year 2000. We felt like that was a good round number. That almost 25 years of performance history was a good, indicator on how we could, or good enough sample size, if you will. I know there's going to be some people who's going to push back and they're going to say wins aren't a team, they're a team stat, not a quarterback stat. Listen, I can't help you people with that. I really can't. If you can't recognize that the most important position in all of sports is responsible for wins, like I said, we can't help you here. So let's move on to the analysis. Now, like we said, we dated back all the way to the year 2000. So since the year 2000, as you can see in the top 8, we have 192 qualifying quarterbacks, right? There's been 8 teams, times 20 something, 24 years, there's been 192 quarterbacks. Out of this analysis, we're trying to figure out how did the teams from the past acquire their quarterback? And if you don't really understand this, let me break it down to you like this. Tom Brady, when he made it to the final 8 in the AFC with the New England Patriots, he was drafted by the Patriots. When he made it to the final 8 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he was acquired as a free agent. Peyton Manning, drafted by Indianapolis, so all his top 8 finishes are going to be drafted with Indianapolis. But when he was with Denver, he was acquired as a free agent. So we're basically just asking the question, how was that quarterback acquired? As you can see here, it's been 125 out of the 192 quarterbacks that have been drafted. That's 65%. 65% have been drafted. As you can see, though, as you get into the next round and these quarterbacks have been cut in half, it jumps to 70%. So 68 out of the 96 quarterbacks have actually been drafted. It's kind of telling you the story already. As you cut it down a little bit further and you go to Super Bowl appearances, it's almost close to that 70% again, where 33 quarterbacks out of the 48 were drafted by their respective team. And then you can see the drop off here in the Super Bowl champs. You can see the drop off for the other numbers. So free agency was cut in half, 6 guys, whereas trade is only down to 1. And this makes the draft at almost 71% of Super Bowl winners were drafted by their respective team. So now we got that answer for step 1, is that usually, in terms of this analysis, if you want a franchise quarterback, your team has to draft him. That's basically the first answer to the first question. Let's move on to where now. Where do you draft this quarterback? Well, since the draft was the best place to find your quarterback, where do you draft him? As you can see here, out of the 192 quarterbacks, 111 of them were drafted in the first round, just in this top 8 alone. So from the top 8 qualifying, 111 of them were drafted in the very first round. Also, we have to mention, guys, you're going to see 8th and 9th round. You're going to say there is no 8th and ninth round. How is this possible? Well, you have to remember guys like Trent Green and Elvis Grbac. They were drafted in the 8th round. So this is pre 7 rounds draft. And then also Brad Johnson was drafted in the 9th round as well, which you will see in the Super Bowl, him winning with the Bucks. That is basically why you'll see rounds 8 and 9 there. UD is obviously undrafted. You'll see guys like Kurt Warner, uh, Tony Romo, undrafted. Next, we're going to go on to the 96 quarterbacks, which means the top 4. And as you can see from the round 1, it's actually jumping up to 58%. So 58. So out of the conference finalists, out of the conference finalist quarterbacks throughout the years, 58% of them were drafted in the first round. That's crazy. And then if you even want to get more into detail, over 70% of the conference final quarterbacks were drafted in the first or second round. So you have to remember also too, in the 6th round, there's one guy that's skewing that data, and that's Tom Brady. Move on to the Super Bowl finalists. So the top 2. It is half of all Super Bowl appearance quarterbacks were drafted in the very first round since 2000. That's huge. It's telling you your answer right there. You have to get your quarterback through the draft and through the first round. As you can see from the winners, if you take Tom Brady out, who's obviously an outlier in this situation, he's drafted in the 6th round, 7 Super Bowl titles, and then also Brad Johnson in the 9th round. You take away those 2 guys, all of them have been drafted in the first 3 rounds. So I know it's hard to say how can you take away a guy, but I mean, Tom Brady's an anomaly. It's obvious. We're just trying to draw up the illustration for you to understand. Okay, so we answered our first 2 questions, correct? We answered the very first one was how do we acquire our quarterback? Well, it wasn't through free agency and it wasn't through trade. It was more likely to have a top 8 finalist quarterback. It was going to be through the draft. The next question was, well, where in the draft? And that turned out to be the very first round. Well, how do we dig deeper? We're going to dig deeper through these quarterback traits. And how do these give us our answer? Well, we're going to look at all of these quarterbacks, all 192 quarterbacks from the past, and we're going to look at these 13 traits and how often they show up in their scouting report. Just note that some of these, like accuracy, that's pretty straightforward. Velocity is pretty straightforward, but there are some that are not straightforward, like mobility. Mobility does indicate a running quarterback, but it also factors in pocket mobility. So basically, escapability. Also, another one would be physicality. You'll see it all the way down at the bottom. This could mean size, right? A guy with good size, but it also can mean another thing. It can mean injury prone, physicalness. How is he? If he's not physical, so he may be a big guy, but he gets hurt very often, his physicality would be ranked, maybe in the middle since he has good size, or maybe even lower than average. So just things to look out for. So let's get right into the analysis for the quarterback traits. Let's start with our top 8 strengths. This is going to be at the top left. As you can see for the top 8 strengths, I'm going to show you how it says 3, 2, 1 up here at the top. So these are quarterbacks. You're going to see 32 here for accuracy. This means that 32 out of the 192 top 8 quarterbacks had accuracy as their first best trait. And I hope that makes sense. Then this number 2 would be their second best trait, and then number 1 would be their third best trait. And I know you're saying, well, why'd you flip that? And that's because we wanted to give you a weighted total. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to give you a weighted total. So that's why you'll see velocity and accuracy. They have the same number of quarterbacks that have that certain trait as a strength, but once you weight it out, velocity is actually a better indicator, or it's the trait that's ranked the highest for each of the quarterbacks. Out of the 58 out of 192, it was their very first trait. So, and then also breaking it down through totals, we just said that's just going to be the total number that it shows up. And then also we're going to go through the percentage, and that's, how many times, so 113 out of the 192 quarterbacks, that would equal 58.9%. As you can see, accuracy, that's ranking about, I would call it either number one or number two, depending on what indicator you're looking at. You could be looking at weighted total, it would be number two. You could be looking at percentage wise, it could still be number one, but accuracy is right up there. Velocity as well. Another one could be mobility. Mobility, in terms of a top eight strength for quarterback, they don't mind a running quarterback. That's a surprise to me. But as this analysis goes on, I'm going to show you a little bit more when we dive deeper into mobility. I would say that the next trait would be leadership. Leadership is a very big skill, very big trait when it comes to quarterbacks, and something that you need to identify on the scouting report. Remember, these are the things you want to identify on the scouting report for that first round quarterback, for you to draft him and for him to have the best chances to have a top 8 finish, just according to the historical data. Next would be football IQ. That isn't about 40% of the top 8 quarterbacks. Let's move on to the top 4 now. Now we start getting into the next round and cutting out some of the fat. You could see in terms of percentages, football IQ drops off a little bit, leadership jumps up, and accuracy jumps up. You could say velocity does a little bit, just a tad. And in terms of weighted total, it has an overwhelming weighted total. But in terms of just, the pure volume, almost 60% of all quarterbacks having that accuracy trait, that's something to take a look at. Also, leadership. So basically, this is telling you 50% have that leadership quality. So every single conference finalist from the year 2000 and on, half of them has had the leadership quality. Football IQ, just like we said, dropped off a little bit. And mobility, it stayed the same in terms of percentages, but we're going to get deeper into that. Top 2 now, going into the Super Bowl, you can see accuracy is a huge component now, right? Accuracy has almost jumped up to 73% of all the Super Bowl appearance quarterbacks from the year 2000 have had that accuracy trait. Now, what about the other traits here, like velocity? More than half have had the velocity trait. Exactly half have had the leadership quality or the leadership skill, and then the football IQ, more than half have had that. Now, as you can see, mobility is starting to trim down. The quarterback who's mostly a running quarterback or on the run or that escapability, it's starting to dwindle as you get into cutting the fat and getting into some of those Super Bowl appearances now, and now Super Bowl winners. Super Bowl winners, you don't even see it because it dropped below 25% and it's basically non-existent. I think the only Super Bowl winners to have the mobile trait has been Patrick Mahomes, and his was ranked third, and Aaron Rodgers, and his was ranked third as well. You can start to see accuracy. Out of all the Super Bowl winners, 75% of them were accurate. 58.3% of them could whip that puppy across the bond at any place at any time on the field. And then the leadership quality was in exactly half of them. And football IQ, obviously, another huge trait. So I think we would go with those 4 traits, as they have been constantly repeating over and over throughout the rounds in the playoffs. So now let's check out some of the weaknesses. So now that we figured out the strengths, let's look at the weaknesses. The weaknesses now, as you can see, mechanics seem to be the highest weakness when it comes to quarterbacks in the top 8. And mechanics, why? Why is it one of the highest weaknesses in terms of the top 8 quarterbacks? So you're saying all good quarterbacks, their most tallied weakness was mechanics, because it's an easy trait to fix. A simple quarterback coach in the NFL level can take care of these mechanic issues. They just can. You're also going to see weaknesses like pocket presence and decision making. And then you're going to see 2 that were also as strengths, and that's velocity and mobility. Those are also going to be up there as well. Let's move on, though, into like cutting the fat and getting into the top 4 finishes and top 2 finishes, because you're going to start to see the numbers move a little bit. Mechanics still jump up to 63.5% when it comes to the conference finalist quarterbacks. But mobility starts to seem, the weight is still high, just like in the top 8. So guys like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, mobility was their highest weakness, even though they were a great winning quarterback. You're going to see other things like decision making and pocket presence. I believe that decision making comes with film study, being in the film room, having those extra reps in practice. That's going to improve your decision making, and maybe that's why it's one of the top weaknesses for some of these top quarterbacks. Now let's move on to the top 2 in Super Bowl appearances. You're going to see mobility. Mobility is jumping up to almost half. Half of the quarterbacks that are in the Super Bowl, mobility is a weakness for them, which means that the pocket presence number has starting to get lower. It's starting to get lower, which means that in terms of successful quarterbacks that reach to the Super Bowl, the mobility starts to move away, starts to dwindle. You're starting to see decision making also kind of drops a little bit. Pocket presence as well, just like we just touched on, and velocity at some capacity too. Getting into the Super Bowl winners, you're going to see mobility starts to take over. Mechanics, mobility, those are the two. A running first quarterback doesn't necessarily translate to being a Super Bowl winner. It's just what it's showing here in terms of the data since the year 2000. I'm sorry to hurt anyone's feelings. That's just the truth. Guys like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, that's what's showing up right here in this mobility column. Those are the guys who win, but they're just not as mobile. Mechanics they end up fixing as their career goes on, working with a quarterbacks coach, like we said. Velocity, sometimes you need the velocity, sometimes you don't. But that's just the weaknesses. Let's move on to some differentials now. So we took the strengths, we minus them to the weaknesses, and that kind of gave us what we were looking for. Like we said, here are the differentials. And the differentials are basically going to tell you that one of the highest in terms of weights and just in total in general is football IQ. Also leadership, so having those two traits along with velocity and accuracy at the top 8 level is huge. So those four traits would be good to have in terms of strengths. Now, what are some of the good weaknesses to have if you're a quarterback? And I know that kind of doesn't sound like it sounds right, but it's kind of telling you what you're looking for on these scouting reports. Mechanics obviously has been number 1. I would call number 2, pocket presence, and number 3, decision making. Now here's one that's hasn't showed up yet, and that's pro readiness. Those scouting reports that said this guy's not pro ready, this guy's not pro ready. That's popped up a lot, but it didn't seem to hurt the quarterback in terms of him, being a top 8 finalist or a top 4 finalist. It's just it doesn't hurt the good quarterbacks as they learn to be pro ready. Moving on to the top 4, you can see much of the same traits are there, just like in the top 8. So there's really no change there. But as you move on to the top 2, you're talking about Super Bowl finalists now. We still have, I would say that it goes from accuracy, leadership, and football IQ, and velocity kind of dwindles away. It does, it dwindles away. Now let's go to the top 4 in terms of the weaknesses. You're starting to see mobility make an appearance now. Mobility is making a huge appearance when it comes to those Super Bowl finalists, while pro readiness is starting to droop down kind of towards maybe not being much of a weakness or a strength. As you move on to Super Bowl winners, then it becomes more clear what the top 4 are and what the bottom 4 are. And obviously, accuracy, leadership, football IQ, and velocity is the top 4 traits you would like from your scouting report when you're looking at a quarterback to draft. And then some of his weaknesses that you're looking for are mechanics, decision making, mobility, and pocket presence. So that's exactly what you're looking for in a quarterback. So how do we put this all together? Remember our first question. How do we acquire this quarterback, our franchise quarterback? First, he should be drafted. We pointed that out throughout the first slide. The second question was, where do we draft him then? Most of them have been drafted in the first round. Now, what are we looking at in terms of strengths on his scouting report? We're looking for accuracy, velocity, leadership, and football IQ. Maybe not necessarily in those order, but he should have 3 out of the 4. Also, he should have 3 out of the 4 of these weaknesses as well, because these are basically can be learned. Mechanics can be learned in the NFL through quarterbacks coach. Pocket presence, this is usually worked through repetition. Decision making also can be worked on in terms of the film room, practice, getting those extra reps. And then mobility, this is not necessarily a learned skill. This is more of the mobile quarterback doesn't win in the NFL like people think he does. So that's just over the last 25 years, that just happens to be the data truth. The data truth only. So in this illustration, we just showed you that we wanted to see 3 out of the 4 traits in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So here we're just showing you the quarterbacks and their best finish. And we're telling you who had 5 or 6 out of the 6 traits. So Brad Johnson, Eli Manning, they both had 6 out of the 6 traits, both strengths and weaknesses that we just touched on, and they were Super Bowl champions. Next would be Dilfer, Brady, Rodgers, and Mahomes. They have 5 out of 6 of the traits. They were also Super Bowl champions. That was their best finish. Now we have the best finish in terms of basically Super Bowl losers. They made it to the top 2. Kerry Collins, Kurt Warner, Jake Delhomme, Rex Grossman, and Jared Goff all having 5 out of the 6. Remember, this was 2000. This research was dated back to 2000 to now to the present. So Kurt Warner won his Super Bowl in 99 or the season of 99. So he just missed the cut, but we can give him a Super Bowl champion claim just off the record. Top 8. So the top 4 were the same as basically the top 2. The top 8 here, Jay Fiedler, Jim Miller, and Kirk Cousins all came in with 5 out of the 6 traits. So those were basically your quarterbacks that had 5 out of the 6 traits or better for our criteria. As always, would like to thank you guys for watching. If you like this content and would like to see more, please subscribe. If you would like the YouTube algorithm to work its magic and distribute this content to many people as possible, please hit that like button. And if you wouldn't mind sharing and then commenting down below, that would be greatly appreciated as well. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.